Hello everybody and welcome to the War Room. This one is for the UFC 262 main event for the lightweight title between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler. Okay, so quick rundown straight away. So Charles Oliveira 30-8 with one no contest. Michael Chandler 22-5. So slightly more experience for Charles Oliveira, or quite a bit more experience. A lot more UFC experience. Obviously Chandler came over to the UFC and had that rather fast win over Dan Hooker. What was that? 2 minutes 30, half a round in the UFC so far. But he was 18-5 in Bellator, and had a lot of good fights there, a lot of high level fights, some real back and forth. For Eddie Alvarez early in his career as well. Okay, so Charles Oliveira is on a real streak at the moment, and in his last couple of fights, he's looked really quite spectacular. You know, there were hints of it earlier on. When he was facing the likes of Clay Guida and Yagos and Jim Miller and David Tamor. You know, we were seeing hints of it, especially against the likes of Jim Miller. We know how good he is. In his fight against Nick Lentz, catching the kick, hitting him with the solid right cross. You could see developments in his striking game, and also the way that he was using his striking to complement his ability to control people with his jiu-jitsu. The Kevin Lee fight was also another good setup for this one, because there could be a lot of similarities drawn between Kevin Lee and Michael Chandler. Kevin Lee's he's a heavy-handed fighter. He's a good wrestler. He stands lower down. He stands long when he's punching. Kevin Lee had all kinds of problems with Charles Oliveira, and stylistically, this could be a similar kind of fight for Michael Chandler. There are certain things that Chandler does very well, and some things that most UFC fans won't be familiar with because they may not have followed his career in Bellator. I'm going to show you some clips of him in a moment. But if you think about Charles Oliveira, for example, he's never fought 5 rounds, so that's one way that Chandler can get into his game, because I think Chandler's done 4 fights over 5 rounds, and he's had some hard fights, hard battles. So we know that Chandler's got the heart in the later rounds. We know he's supremely conditioned, and there's never been any questions around Charles Oliveira's conditioning, but he's also never fought someone that might be able to put the pace on him that Michael Chandler can do, and especially into those championship rounds. That might be where we start to see limitations in Charles Oliveira's game. And I'll be honest, I picked Charles Oliveira to be champ, either last year or this year. I've always thought he's had the potential to do it. But the more I've researched this, the more I've realized that it is very, very competitive. It's very much a 50-50 fight. So Charles Oliveira has got great striking, but it's much more, he stands kind of high. It's very Muay Thai. He's got great long-range striking, good kicks to the body and to the head, mixes his striking up excellently as well. A really nicely polished, well-rounded style that's not particularly based on athleticism or power or, speed at covering distance. Because he doesn't mind being taken down, he walks people down. He walks people down with pressure. He forces them to shoot. And, sometimes, and even in recent fights, we've seen him be more dominant with his grappling, get body locks and just pick people up and slam them to the ground. But most of the time, it's him pressuring into other people and, them trying to level change on him to get away from his striking. And I could very much see him leaning into that with Michael Chandler. I think Oliveira is going to feel very much like if it hits the floor, it's his fight. I think he's going to feel like he's going to be able to move Chandler around and tie him up and sweep him and take his back, probably get the rear naked choke. I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think there are certain elements of Chandler's game. His top control, his basing is excellent. And he's got some submissions of his own as well, which when complemented with fatigue over 4.5 rounds, perhaps, he might even be able to get the submission over Charles Oliveira, which might surprise some, but I will put it out there. There are 2 losses to Charles Oliveira's record, both by guillotine, Pettis and Lamas. There are ways to his neck. He's a tall individual. He's got a long neck. Michael Chandler, when he's clamped onto something, he's got that wrestler strength, and it's same with all wrestlers that have got that kind of style in their game. Matt Hughes is very similar to Michael Chandler in the way that he grapples, clamps onto people, and just manhandles them. He also applies that to submissions, and that could be something that, later in the rounds could be a real problem for Charles Oliveira, especially if he starts to get tired. Because I just don't expect Michael Chandler to get tired. I've not seen it yet. I've seen him slow down because he's been beaten up and he's worn out, but not because he's fatigued. The pace that he sets is something quite special. Okay, we have a quick drink, and then I'll get into some video. Okay, right. So, no 5-round fights for Oliveira. 3 losses by sub, 2 of them being guillotines. He's got great anacondas and great guillotines. That's a result of him, people level changing onto him. You remember the Clay Guida fight where Guida shot in and he grabbed him, wrapped him up, and just kind of jogged his feet back a couple of times to create space to really properly wrap that guillotine up. That's the main vulnerability here for Chandler level changing. I don't think Chandler's going to be shy to grapple with him. It wouldn't surprise me if he does. But it's far more interesting for me when they're at range striking, because Charles Oliveira is going to want to walk into Chandler's range to tempt him to level change because of the pressure from striking. Chandler's going to want to be at distance because his ability to cover range is pretty amazing. I mean, he's so fast. So I pulled a couple of clips to show you. That's been recording 6 minutes of nothing, Jamie. Okay, I pulled a couple of clips to show you. It's the 0 to 60 off the market that's so impressive about Chandler. He's such a good athlete. I mean, he stands long, so it does make his lead leg vulnerable. But his ability to get in and out and just touch one time and not get touched in return. And, most of the time his opponents see him coming in and they see what's coming, but they get hit and they still try and counter, and he's just not there to be hit. And, tempting them with his jab, fully commits to the jab. Just look at the way that he throws that jab. He stands low, so there's the double threat of a potential level change. He jumps in heavy on his lead leg, drives off his back leg, and places. He's really fully committed to that jab. But his opponents freeze up because they don't know whether he's level changing or not. Now, Pitbull here is trying to counter with a left hook. But part of the reason why Chandler gets away with this jab and throws it so hard is because he's level changing so low that even the punch, even if he doesn't land, the punch goes over the top of his head. He's just so good at stinging and staying out of range. But the challenge in this fight against Oliveira will be staying out of range. And that right hand it's Usman-esque. Even as Jimmy Smith said in commentary, even in slow motion, it's fast. It doesn't get a great deal more perfect than that. And the reason why this works so well is because what you'll notice, so if you look at where his feet are at the moment, he's going to reposition both feet before he throws his punch. And the reason he gets away with it is because he disguises it with his lead hand. He's going to fire this hand out as if he's throwing it, as if he's throwing a punch. So watch. He's going to reset both of his feet. Front foot moves, back foot jogs forward. I know the camera angles move slightly, but you get the point. Jogs both of his feet forward and throws that lead hand out there. You can see Pitbull's reached out to catch it. You can see his reach now, and because he's been throwing this jab over and over again, Pitbull's counter is that left hook, as we've just been looking at in that previous clip. So Pitbull goes to reach out, the punch is not there, and he sees the punch coming, but he's not there in time to catch him. That is just a beautiful right hand. He's so fast off the mark. And so basically what I'm saying is if he's at distance with Oliveira, his ability to hop in and smash him with that right hand. And it's not just his right hand either. We saw in his fight against Dan Hooker, he's got power in his left hand as well. Look at this. Look how quick he closes distance here. That is perfection, that is. This is a good example, so when he fought Ben Henderson, his recent fight against Henderson, we saw him use his opposite hand. He's been switching his stance a lot more, which, I think his developments working with Henry Hooft at Sanford, he feels far more comfortable on his feet and he's punching with power in both hands. He stepped through in the Dan Hooker fight and knocks him out, and he does the same here with Ben Henderson. and he's in a southpaw stance when he's throwing. That's a long left. It's almost exactly the same as his punch against Pitbull, but obviously from an opposite stance, showing that ambidexterity makes him a double threat. You know, that means he can now switch stances to cut you down and reach you when you don't think you can be reached. And you know, his back foot's not even planted on that. And this is something else that I noticed as well. And thank you, Michael Chandler, for reminding me with this angle that I left in to remind myself. So thank you, me, previously. His second shot is always impactful. He has this consideration for the next punch he lands, because often he'll hit somebody and he'll see them drop. But at the same time as them dropping, he's not getting overexcited like that's the end of the fight. He's watching where they're going. And that second punch, that follow-up punch, is usually pretty crisp. This one against Ben Henderson, the actuality, when he gets hit with this straight left, although Hendo goes down, because he's so overextended, and I mean, you can see his punch is kind of turned up. Because he's overextended, it's not a full power punch. Hendo goes down, but he's looking at him here. You can see his head's turned. He's looking at Chandler. It's the next punch that finishes him off. And it comes right in and cracks him right on the top of the head. And that's the one that actually knocks him out, because that's the point where he goes down face first. So the danger is not only dealing with that speed of the first punch, but then also being completely disorientated when he steps in and cracks you with the second. And you know, and to follow up on that, the additional threat of, as he's throwing the power punch, you assume something's going to be coming behind it, whether that's another punch or a level change, and it opens up the hips for him to get pretty close in. And once he's in close, once he's got his hands on someone, he's so strong at manhandling them and controlling them. Look at that. See what he does there. His opponent has got a fantastic whizzer here. So his opponent here is driving down into the back of Chandler's shoulder, which is driving him to the mat. And Chandler does a great job. He circles around with his lower body. Circles around so he can get into a better position, puts his hand across the back of his opponent's head. So now he's turned this underhook into what was a strong whizzer for his opponent. Now he can start driving that over his back. Bear in mind, his opponent's shoulder's now being hyperextended. You'll see it as it's happening. So he's driving down onto the back of the head. That was a pretty good arrow, wasn't it? I'll have to keep practicing. He's driving down onto the back of the head, and now he's also driving this way with his other arm. So he's forcing his opponent to roll over onto his back. Wrap and then drive with that far arm. You see how that hand goes punch into the canvas? This one here. Drives to the canvas and forces his opponent onto his back. Takes side control, immediately pins that near side arm, and now it's doomsday. His opponent actually does a really good job of firing his arm out to prevent a great deal of ground and pound. And this is where you see a veteran move from Chandler, because he looks up at the screen. Where are we? Lands a couple of shots. Looks up at the screen, has a quick look where his opponent is. Now what he does, he's going to start to circle his arm back, and it's going to start pushing his opponent's arm over, which his opponent knows that he's vulnerable. So he tries to clear it, which then allows Chandler, he goes over the top. His opponent tries to block it. He bends his arm, flicks it back, and then comes all the way around and locks up that arm triangle. And this is such a strong position for him. This palm-to-palm grip. My old wrestling coach used to shout, "No big fingers." He meant thumbs. You know, you go right over, and this is the grip. And you'll see him use this in this position with the head and arm, but also when he's in a rear naked choke position. I mean, you can see his upper body. He's got broad shoulders. He's got thick lats as well. So all of that clamping and controlling, everything's pulling into that grip, which is why it's such a strong position for him. It's developed from years and years of wrestling. And he nails this guy with an arm triangle, puts him to sleep. Does a great job of controlling it. That's the dog on the bone wrestling kind of thing I'm talking about. Look, his opponent bridges over here. Let's watch that in slow motion. His opponent bridges over here, but he stays clamped onto the upper body and scrambles and gets back to the side and finishes there. It's just lovely work. And, you know, the threat of the right hand as well. He doesn't always need to put people down. He can always hurt them and in a scramble get into an advantageous position. This was his first fight against Eddie Alvarez. I think he was 8-0 at this point, and it was an absolute war. It was a great fight. Definitely worth a revisit. I mean, Chandler was just pressure, pressure, pressure. And as soon as Eddie started to turn there was nowhere he could go. I mean, he's in mount position here. You can see Chandler as grapevined his legs, so he's controlling on both sides. So what this allows him to do, because he's hooked under the legs, he's able to drive his hips down into Eddie Alvarez, which is pinning him square to the mat. You can see how spread he is. So he's keeping Eddie's legs pinned together, and he's also pressuring down on top. So when Eddie's turning, there's nowhere for him to go. He can't get his hips off the canvas. He tries to turn, but even as he's turning, you can see Chandler, he's got one hook here to control his turn, and he's got another hook here, setting up that rear naked choke. And because his hips are still so low, as Eddie's turning, he turns like still hips. Still look how low his hips are. Look at that pressure from Chandler's hips. It never ever raises above what, a foot and a half off the ground. Like, that is level all the way through. He's just not. I mean, it's fantastic hip pressure. There's just nowhere for Eddie to turn. And as he turns, hooks fall in straight away. The pressure's still down on Eddie's back, and you can see how hyperextended his lower back is. And there's the palm to palm again. Look. Very, very strong position for him. And Rick Horn again, another good grappler, another good wrestler, just manhandled by him. Manhandled and worn out and discouraged, and find himself in this position. And this is quite common as well, is Chandler will jump on someone's back, and while he's fighting for the rear naked choke, he already starts to drive his hips forward to drag them back. It's not the only time you'll see that. There's another example here where he clamps onto his opponent. He wraps around that neck, and then as he's finishing the choke, you can see how mean he is with it as well. As he's finishing the choke, he's already driving into their back. So he's not only is he hyperextend their back, but naturally he's lifting their chin up, which exposes the opportunity to throw in the choke. So I know it's just been a bit of a Michael Chandler whirlwind, but if we strip it down to the basics, so Chandler's going to want to control the center, and he's going to want to bounce in and out and keep testing with that jab. He's going to throw the jab to the head and to the body, and he's going to vary his targets, but then he's going to be looking to set up this power right. That power right can also now be the power left as well, because he's showing ambidexterity. So on the flip side, Oliveira, he's going to be standing tall, and he's going to be trying to walk Chandler down. He's going to be trying to pick him off and just kind of roll all of the more damaging punches off. There's a vulnerability to the midsection, which I think Chandler's going to be working well. But ultimately, Oliveira is going to try and pressure him so he level changes and takes him down. And that's where we get to see them contend on the floor. Chandler's got such good top pressure, great ground and pound, very, very persuasive ground and pound as well. He'll punch you in the directions that he wants you to turn. So not only is he good physically controlling, but he's also conscious of other ways of making people do what he wants them to do. And the pace that he sets as well is the thing that might set him apart on the ground when it comes to his lack of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is where Oliveira is sure to be shining. Oliveira is a constant whirlwind of attacks on the feet, on the ground, much like Tony Ferguson is on the feet in the co-main event. It's an ankle lock to a calf slicer to a scramble up and try and take you back to a drop off to an arm bar. You think of the arm bar and the triangle setup that he had against Tony Ferguson right at the ends of those rounds, where he had Tony Ferguson's arm completely hyperextended. That's a real high level of skill to be able to just completely control someone like Tony Ferguson on the ground. I think he's going to struggle to put Chandler on his back, but I do think he might be able to scramble and create chaos, enough chaos to create windows to attack submissions. Maybe one of those, like a half sweep to a triangle, or, an arm drag to a back take, something like that. But it's going to be difficult to do against Chandler, who's going to be surely trying to keep himself facing his opponent and on top position most of the time. And then if Chandler's pace starts to wear, championship rounds, territory where Charles Oliveira has not been yet, there might be a potential for a submission for Chandler. But that's when we're talking real fatigue on Charles Oliveira's part. If it does get to those later rounds and Oliveira's on his back and he can't scramble, it's all about neck defense, because arm triangles and rear naked chokes are Michael Chandler's game. And if he's got you hurt or he's got you tired, he's going to try and finish you at all costs. This is going to be an electric main event, and I can't wait to see who becomes the new champion of the world. You didn't remind me of Twitter questions again, young Jamie. Let me have a quick drink while this plays through. Okay, here we go. Right. Dakota Rhodes. Sounds like a movie star name. Okay. What don't casual fans know about Chandler's game? What tricks does he have? His ability to cover his range with his lead hand. He does a lot of feeling out with his lead hand. You know, he jabs and tests a lot and sees what his opponent's reactions are. And he's not stingy with his feints as well. You know, he's very good at using a feint, especially if he's already established a target that he'll attack. If he steps in and hits a good jab to the body and hurts his opponent, he registers that and he'll use that feint again to set up something else. So there is an educated nature to Michael's striking, and you know would be expected with someone like Henry Hooft. He's going to be up against another very intelligent striker as well. It's just a different kind of striker. But Chandler, because his output is lower than Oliveira's when it comes to striking, he has to use precision and distance management to make up for it. Because when he lands with power and he lands, with precision. I keep saying that same word. He lands with power, he lands on his target, and he tends to hurt, you know, fairly consistently when he lands cleanly. Whereas Oliveira, it's more about wearing you down and finding ways around your guard because you just can't block everything and you're getting overwhelmed. Chandler's going to have to use his feints to hold Oliveira off, and he's going to have to hurt him as well to hold him off because it might just be like a tsunami. He might just get overwhelmed and find himself running into a guillotine that he knew was coming. And that would be a very frustrating way to win your attempt at a UFC title. But it's definitely possible. Okay. I don't know how long I left these on for. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, this is a long one. This house cat is constantly asking me good questions. Oh, there we go. Okay. What factors do you think go into the various ages fighters peak at? Between Oliveira, Blachowicz, and Chandler, we're seeing fighters who seem to peak later, whereas other fighters tend to have their peak performances earlier. Good question. I think it's a variety of things. And obviously experience is a benefit to everybody. So if you can have 40 MMA fights and not be a mess of scar tissue and broken bones, then you're going to be able to apply that experience. That when you have experience but you don't have the physical capability of applying it, then you know that's when people start to find their way out to the end of their career. But guys like heavyweights are good examples. Guys like Olenek and Overeem, they're so skilled. They've been through so many seasons of their career where they've been a grappler and they've been a kickboxer, and then they've done this and they've done that and they've moved around and they've fought for this title and they've won that title. All of that experience goes into each performance every time they step in there. Because you can imagine when Overeem steps in there against someone who's 6'5", he's like, okay, well, I fought this guy and this guy and this guy who was 6'5", and they were all southpaws and they've got a good long striking game. So he has experience to draw upon. And the challenge of getting experience in MMA is not sustaining the damage at the same time. So what we see is the guys that are peaking later. Masvidal's another good example of a guy that's kind of turned a corner recently. Sometimes it's about moving weight class. Sometimes people are fighting too hard against the scales. And I think for Charles Oliveira, that's definitely the case. But I think primarily it's about getting as much experience as you can without taking as much damage as possible. And experience always pays. I always lean slightly towards the fighter with the experience, just because they've got so much to draw upon, so many bad experiences they've been in, bad circumstances they've overcome. And I don't mind a few losses as well, because people learn so much from them. So I think it's different from one fighter to another. Some fighters rely far more on their physical capabilities, which means they peak when they peak physically, whereas a technical fighter will peak maybe a bit later. Once their physical athletic peak has passed, they'll peak later because they've united common sense and maturity with their technical ability. I hope that answered your question. Okay. I'll quick drink again. Okay, right, there we go. Gordon. My name, Gordon. Now, this was a good question. and I did kind of touch on this earlier, but this just allowed me to circle back to it. It's a good question. What's the difference between a wrestler and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner in an MMA bout? In what situations can one style be advantageous over the other? Okay. So the focus of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to submit someone, control someone, and keep yourself safe in circumstances where you're potentially overpowered or outstrengthed or outmatched in some way physically. I mean, that's where the majority of martial arts, kind of found their feet once they weren't needed for warfare. So, Jiu-Jitsu comes from being able to deal with someone in bad situations and reverse those situations, fighting off your back, fighting against someone that's got maybe, better physical attributes than you. A wrestler is about controlling someone who is very much the same size as you. It's a strict weight class rule, a strict weight class sport. And it's about being, finely tuned and well conditioned to control an individual and pin someone within a particular bracket of time. So the way that they transfer over to MMA, if you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, you might find yourself put in bad positions by a wrestler, but be able to work sweeps and, elevate with butterfly hooks and understand how to utilize underhooks to create scrambles. And, there are lots of different tools at your disposal to keep a fight moving and keep moving in the direction of a finish. If you're a wrestler, it's more about controlling someone and then instigating a finish out of that control. So if I've taken someone down, and I'm a good wrestler, which I'm not, so I'm speaking objectively here. Like if I've taken someone down, now it's my choice as to whether I force them to turn into a submission, or I beat them up until the referee stops it, or I can stop them with strikes. Jiu-Jitsu is much more of a problem solver. Wrestling is much more of a problem creator. Wrestling is there to create problems consistently from your opponent and to tire them out and make them work, and force them to do things that are not offensive in any way. They're working purely defensive. Jiu-Jitsu is much more about being defensive until you can be offensive. So they come from different ends of the spectrum. Look, one thing I will add on the end of that is that the cage, the fence, and the angles that the octagon provides is alien territory for everybody, no matter what discipline you come from. Even if you're boxing or kickboxing, you're still working in a ring which is square. So you're working with 90-degree angles, whereas in a cage, in an octagon particularly, you're working in you've got 135-degree angles for each corner. It's a massive angle, but it's an angle that can be utilized and manipulated if you understand how to do it. And we're starting to see a few fighters understand the space now. But there's a consistency at the moment in the sport where a lot of fighters are quite happy to fight off the fence if they're not confident in their wrestling, because their takedown offense against the fence is something entirely different to their takedown offense out in the open, where they can be double-legged and power doubled and elevated. Masvidal is a great example of this. He doesn't mind fighting with his back foot against the fence if he's fighting someone that's going to shoot consistently, because then they're only shooting him into the fence where he's working his takedown offense. And that is an alien game for anybody, no matter whether you're a wrestler or a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're watching fights in the near future. Takedown defense against the fence, I think, may be something we should score as a separate stat, because I think some fighters would have a much higher takedown defense score if it was specifically against the fence. And that was a very long-winded answer to that question, and I think that is the end of it. Is there another question? There's not another question. That's all the questions. Have I missed anything? UFC stats. Okay, well, the reason that I don't want to refer to this too much is because Chandler's stats are based on a short period of time, because he's not been in the UFC for very long. I don't know whether they've incorporated some other stats here, but I'm not sure. I mean, Oliveira's got a height and reach advantage. It's 2 inches in height and 3 inches in reach. They're both orthodox, but as I said, Chandler does fight out of both stances, or switches into both stances to strike. Yeah, I won't get into the rest of them because I don't think they're accurate stats anyway, given the fact that we've not got much on Chandler. I think I've answered everything there. I mean, Chandler's just looking fantastic at the moment. It's all about that 0 to 60, but staying on the outside to be able to cover distance and not be pressured to punch and level change because there's just a bombardment coming in your way. A really exciting fight. Looking forward to it. Enjoy the fights. See you next time.